Emily woke up early that morning, just like she always did. The sound of her alarm was not her favorite part of the day, but she had trained herself to see it as a reminder of responsibility. She quickly got ready, tying her hair neatly into a bun and putting on her waitress uniform. It was not glamorous, but she wore it with pride. For her, the job was more than just carrying plates and writing down orders. It was about serving people with respect, making sure they felt welcome, and adding a little kindness to their day. The restaurant where Emily worked was not an ordinary one. It was one of the most expensive restaurants in the city. The kind of place where people came in fancy clothes, expensive watches, and shiny cars. The customers were often businessmen, politicians, or wealthy families who wanted the best dining experience. For them, dinner was not just about eating food. It was about showing status. Emily had seen all types of people come through those glass doors. Some were polite, some were arrogant, and some treated the waitstaff as if they were invisible. Even though Emily was the daughter of the CEO who owned this restaurant chain, she never told anyone. She did not want to be treated differently. She believed in living like a normal person and understanding life from the ground level. So, when she put on her uniform, she was not a rich daughter. She was just Emily, the waitress who smiled at everyone and tried to make their experience pleasant. That evening shift was busy from the start. The tables were filling quickly, and the sound of laughter, clinking glasses, and soft background music filled the air. Emily moved between tables with practiced ease, balancing trays, greeting guests, and remembering orders without even looking at her notepad sometimes. Her coworkers admired her calmness. Even when a customer was rude, Emily never lost her temper. She believed respect was the strongest reply to disrespect. She checked on a family seated near the window. The little boy spilled his juice, and Emily quickly brought napkins, cleaned the table, and even managed to make the boy laugh by folding the napkin into a funny hat. The parents thanked her warmly, and that made her feel good. Small gestures like this were the reason she loved her job. It was not about tips or pay. It was about leaving a positive mark on someone's evening. As the night moved on, she noticed a new reservation under the name Daniel. She had heard this name before. He was a young millionaire known for his success in business and his luxurious lifestyle. Rumors among the staff said he was polite, but his girlfriend was difficult. Emily didn't pay much attention to gossip. To her, every customer deserved the same treatment no matter who they were. She straightened her uniform, picked up her notepad, and got ready to welcome the next guests. Her heart never raced at seeing rich or famous people, because she had grown up around them. But she always reminded herself, people are people, whether rich or poor, whether powerful or ordinary. Respect had no price tag. The door opened, and a tall young man walked in, his arm wrapped around a glamorous woman dressed in designer clothes. Emily recognized Daniel immediately from pictures in the newspaper, but she kept her professional smile. She guided them to their table near the center of the restaurant. Daniel nodded politely, but his girlfriend looked around with a critical expression, as if nothing was good enough. Emily noticed this but stayed calm. As she handed them the menu, she caught the way the girlfriend smirked at her uniform, whispering something into Daniel's ear that made him look slightly uncomfortable. Emily ignored it. She had dealt with worse before. What mattered to her was keeping her dignity and doing her job well. She moved to the next table to take orders, but she could not help noticing that the girlfriend's laughter carried across the room. It was sharp and mocking. Emily told herself not to let it get under her skin. Customers came with different moods, and she had to handle them all. But deep down, she wondered why some people believed a job like hers was less honorable than any other. After all, wasn't she the one making sure they enjoyed their evening? By the time she returned to their table to take their order, she was fully prepared to be professional, no matter what attitude she faced. She held her notepad steady, her smile soft but firm. Daniel gave his order politely, but before Emily could turn to the girlfriend, the woman laughed and said, "Well, let's see if the waitress can get it right." Her tone was sharp, mocking, and loud enough for the nearby table to hear. Emily felt the sting of the insult, but she nodded politely and asked, "And what would you like, ma'am?" Inside, Emily took a deep breath. It was not the first time she had been mocked, and it would not be the last. But tonight felt different. Something about the girlfriend's arrogance, something about the way she enjoyed putting others down, stirred an unusual feeling in Emily's heart. She could sense this shift would not be just another ordinary night. Something was about to unfold that no one in the restaurant could have imagined. The ordinary shift had begun like every other, with trays, smiles, and orders. But as Emily walked away from the table, she had no idea that this evening would test her patience, reveal her hidden truth, and leave everyone in the restaurant speechless by the end of the night. The restaurant doors opened with a soft chime as Daniel stepped inside, his girlfriend Vanessa holding tightly onto his arm. From the very first glance, it was clear they belonged to a different world. Daniel was dressed in a tailored suit, his shoes polished to perfection, and his confidence showed in every step he took. Vanessa, on the other hand, seemed eager for everyone to notice her. She wore a glittering dress, sparkling jewelry, and carried a designer handbag that alone probably cost more than what most of the waiters earned in a year. Her head tilted slightly upward, as though she was measuring the worth of everyone around her. Emily noticed them immediately, not because she was impressed by their wealth or their looks. She had seen many such people walk through those doors, but because of the way Vanessa's eyes scanned the room. It wasn't with admiration, but with judgment. Some customers entered with curiosity, some with excitement, but Vanessa's gaze felt cold, sharp, and superior, as if she believed she was above everyone in the room. Daniel, however, seemed calmer. When Emily approached with her warm, professional smile and said, "Good evening. Welcome to La Royale. Please follow me." Daniel nodded politely. Vanessa didn't return the smile. Instead, she glanced at Emily's uniform and smirked, whispering something into Daniel's ear. His expression flickered for a moment, an awkward smile that looked forced, before he gestured for Emily to lead the way. Emily walked them to a table in the center of the dining room, a spot where many guests liked to sit because it gave them a view of the whole restaurant. Daniel pulled out the chair for Vanessa, who sat down gracefully, crossing her legs in a way that screamed confidence and control. Daniel took his seat across from her, adjusting his jacket. Emily handed them the menus, her movements calm and professional, though she could feel Vanessa's eyes on her the entire time, almost like a challenge. The restaurant was buzzing with activity. The sound of glasses clinking, conversations blending with soft music, and waiters moving quickly around tables created a lively atmosphere. Yet, somehow, the presence of Daniel and Vanessa stood out. Other guests glanced at them, some recognizing Daniel immediately from magazines and business articles. He had a reputation as a young millionaire who had worked hard for his success. But what caught even more attention was Vanessa. She carried herself like she was royalty, her laughter ringing louder than necessary, her gestures exaggerated, almost as if she wanted everyone to look at her. Emily returned to the table after giving them a moment to settle. She asked gently, "Would you like to start with something to drink?" Daniel responded with a polite, "Yes, I'll have a glass of red wine, please." His voice was calm, steady, and respectful. But before Emily could even turn to Vanessa, she let out a laugh. "Wine? That's so basic," Vanessa said, rolling her eyes. "Don't you have anything more special?" She looked directly at Emily, her tone sharp and mocking. "I hope you know your own menu." Emily didn't flinch. She had dealt with worse. "Of course, ma'am. We also have a fine selection of champagnes and signature cocktails. Would you like me to recommend one?" she asked in her polite voice. Vanessa leaned back, still smirking. "Oh, recommend something? Do you even know the difference between a cheap drink and a premium one?" she said loudly enough that the couple at the next table glanced over. Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Vanessa," he began, but she cut him off with a wave of her manicured hand. Emily, keeping her smile steady, replied, "Yes, ma'am, I do. We carry only premium quality selections here. Perhaps our house champagne would suit you." Her voice remained calm, her eyes soft, refusing to mirror the arrogance directed at her. Vanessa finally agreed, though she rolled her eyes as she placed her order. Emily jotted it down and walked away, her posture straight, refusing to let the insult get to her. At the bar counter, she took a deep breath before relaying the order to the bartender. She had always known her job came with challenges. People often assumed waiters and waitresses had no ambition or intelligence, but Emily never let such shallow judgments shake her. She believed that dignity was not about what job one held, but about how one carried themselves through life. Back at the table, Vanessa had already started talking loudly, her voice carrying across the room. She boasted about her expensive clothes, her travels abroad, and how difficult it was to find places worthy of her presence. Daniel listened quietly, sometimes nodding, sometimes distracted by his phone, but never interrupting her. Emily could sense that Daniel was not as arrogant as Vanessa, but he also didn't stop her behavior. When Emily returned with their drinks, Vanessa gave her a long look before saying, "You know, it must be tiring, standing all day in that uniform. Don't you ever wish you could be more important?" Her tone was dripping with fake sympathy, but the cruelty behind it was clear. Emily set the drinks down carefully and simply replied, "I find importance in doing my job well, ma'am." Her words were simple, but her steady voice made Daniel glance up, as if he had noticed the strength hidden behind them. Vanessa only laughed again, shaking her head. Other diners were beginning to notice the tension. Emily could feel the weight of their eyes as she walked away, but she did not let it show. She knew this was just the beginning of a long evening. Vanessa had already shown her true colors, and Emily could sense there would be more to come. For now, she reminded herself to stay calm, to do her work with the same respect she always carried. Yet deep inside, she knew this was no ordinary table. Something about this couple, about Vanessa's cruelty and Daniel's silence, hinted that the night ahead would be unforgettable. What Emily did not yet know was that this entrance, this first exchange, was setting the stage for a shocking truth that would soon turn the entire restaurant upside down. Emily returned to the table with her notepad ready, standing with the same gentle smile she gave to every guest. She had learned to treat every customer equally, no matter who they were or how they behaved. Daniel glanced at the menu quickly and gave his order in a polite tone, choosing a main dish with no fuss. His voice carried respect, but it was low and almost hesitant, as if he didn't want to make too much noise in the presence of his girlfriend. Vanessa, on the other hand, held the menu like it was beneath her. She tapped her nails against the table and let out a laugh before speaking. "I don't even know how people eat half the things on this list," she said loudly. Her words were not meant for Daniel alone. They were aimed at Emily, and perhaps even for the other diners within earshot. "Do you even know how to pronounce half of these dishes?" she asked, raising one eyebrow and smirking. Emily stood straight, her notepad steady in her hand. "Yes, ma'am, I do. Would you like me to explain any of them to you?" Her voice was calm, respectful, and kind. But Vanessa was not looking for kindness. She tilted her head back and laughed. "Oh, that's adorable. The waitress thinks she's an expert now." The sound of her laugh echoed across the restaurant, drawing the attention of a few nearby tables. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, glancing at Emily as though silently apologizing, but he said nothing. Emily only nodded politely and asked again, "What would you like me to bring you, ma'am?" Vanessa rolled her eyes and finally picked something off the menu, saying it slowly in a mocking tone, as if testing Emily. "Let's see if you can even write this down properly." Her words carried poison, but Emily simply wrote the order neatly and without hesitation. As Emily walked away from the table to place their orders, she felt a familiar sting in her chest. She had been insulted before. Many people looked down on waiters and waitresses, believing that serving food made someone less worthy of respect. But there was something sharper about Vanessa's tone. It wasn't just arrogance. It was pleasure. Vanessa seemed to enjoy humiliating her. At the counter, Emily took a slow breath before handing the order to the kitchen. She reminded herself of the rule she lived by. No matter what others said, her dignity was in her own hands. Their words could not change her worth. Still, it hurt. She could feel the whispers of other guests who had witnessed the exchange, their eyes following her as she walked past their tables. When she returned to check on their drinks, Vanessa wasn't finished. She leaned forward on the table and asked loudly, "So tell me, how long have you been doing this job? Don't you ever get tired of pretending to be happy all the time?" Her tone was mocking, but her words carried a cruel curiosity. Emily's smile remained, though inside she felt the pressure building. "I enjoy my work, ma'am. It makes me happy to serve people and be part of their special evenings," she answered honestly. Vanessa burst into another laugh, this one louder than before. "Happy? Oh please. Nobody actually chooses to be a waitress. People end up here because they have no other choice. Isn't that right?" She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms, her smirk growing wider. The table next to them went quiet. A young couple sitting nearby glanced at Emily with sympathy. Even Daniel looked uneasy, clearing his throat softly as if he wanted to intervene. But once again he stayed silent, his eyes fixed on his glass of wine. Emily felt her cheeks warm, but not from shame. It was from anger she was trying to hide. She could have easily revealed her true identity, that she was not just a waitress but the daughter of the CEO who owned this entire restaurant. One word from her, and Vanessa would have been silenced. But Emily had promised herself long ago that she would never use her family's name to gain respect. She wanted people to see her for who she was, not for what she owned. So she simply smiled again, though her voice was firmer this time. "Every job has dignity, ma'am. What matters is how you do it, not what others think of it." Her calm response caught Daniel's attention. He looked up at Emily as though surprised by the strength in her words. Vanessa, however, rolled her eyes again. "Spare me the speech. Just make sure the food comes quickly. I don't have the patience to wait all night." Emily nodded, not giving Vanessa the satisfaction of seeing her upset. She turned away and walked back toward the kitchen, her steps steady, though inside her emotions were tangled. The insults had begun, and they were only growing sharper. She knew Vanessa wasn't done yet. Some people mocked out of boredom, others out of ignorance. But Vanessa's cruelty seemed intentional, as if she enjoyed watching others squirm. Emily braced herself for what might come next. Around the restaurant, other diners whispered quietly. They had noticed how Emily kept her composure despite the humiliation. Some admired her patience. Others wondered how much longer she could take it before breaking. As Emily placed another order at the kitchen counter, she caught her reflection in the polished glass. She straightened her uniform, fixed her bun, and reminded herself that she was stronger than the words thrown at her. This was not the first insult she had faced, but tonight felt different. Tonight, the insults were not just small wounds. They were the beginning of something much bigger, something that would soon reveal a truth no one in the room expected. And so the night carried on, with Vanessa's laughter growing louder, Emily's patience being tested further, and Daniel quietly watching the storm build. The first insults had been spoken, but the real test was only beginning. The evening grew busier as more guests filled the restaurant. The air was full of conversations, laughter, and the clinking of glasses. Waiters moved quickly from one table to another, carrying trays of food and drinks, making sure every customer was satisfied. In the middle of all this, Emily kept her focus, even though her heart was heavy. Vanessa's words from earlier still echoed in her mind, but she forced herself to stay calm. She had promised herself that no matter how much someone tried to hurt her pride, she would not lose her dignity. Daniel and Vanessa's table was easy to spot, not just because of their central position but because Vanessa made sure all eyes were on her. She laughed loudly, spoke in a voice that carried across the room, and made exaggerated gestures whenever she talked. Daniel mostly stayed quiet, sipping his wine, nodding along, but never correcting her behavior. When Emily returned to their table with the food, she carefully placed the dishes in front of them. Daniel thanked her politely, but Vanessa leaned back in her chair and smirked. "Finally, I was starting to think you had forgotten us," she said, loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. Emily replied softly, "I'm sorry for the wait, ma'am. We wanted to make sure your meal was prepared perfectly." But Vanessa wasn't satisfied. She picked up her fork, stared at her plate, and then pushed it away slightly. "This doesn't even look right. Do you even know how to serve properly?" Her voice was sharp, cutting through the hum of the restaurant. A silence spread across the tables nearby. People pretended to be focused on their own meals, but their ears were listening closely. Emily felt their eyes on her, and she knew they were watching to see how she would react. She steadied her voice and asked, "Is there something wrong with the dish, ma'am? I can ask the chef to prepare it again." Vanessa laughed, tilting her head back. "Oh no, the food is fine. It's just the service. I mean, look at you, smiling all the time, acting like this job is something special. It's just waiting tables. Do you really think anyone respects you for this?" Daniel looked down at his plate, his jaw tightening, but still he said nothing. Emily felt her stomach twist, but she kept her smile, even though it was harder now. She could feel the humiliation in every word Vanessa spoke. The room seemed quieter, as if everyone was holding their breath. Vanessa leaned forward, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "Tell me, how much do you even make in a day? Enough to buy that cheap uniform? Or maybe a pair of shoes?" She looked down at Emily's simple black shoes and laughed again. The sound cut deep, but Emily refused to show it. She answered calmly, "Ma'am, I don't think my salary should concern you. I'm here to make sure you enjoy your evening." That answer, though respectful, only seemed to amuse Vanessa more. She clapped her hands together lightly, as if mocking Emily's composure. "Oh, how professional. You really practice these lines, don't you?" I almost believed it for a second. The couple at the next table shifted uncomfortably, exchanging glances. One of them shook their heads slightly, clearly disapproving of Vanessa's behavior. Still, no one spoke up. Emily turned to leave the table, hoping the situation would cool down, but Vanessa wasn't finished. She raised her voice even louder, making sure everyone could hear. "Honestly, I don't know how people live like this, working all day just to serve others. I would die if I had to do such a miserable job." Gasps rippled quietly across the room. A few diners stared directly at Vanessa now, their expressions disapproving. Daniel finally looked up, his face tense, but the words stuck in his throat. He opened his mouth slightly as if to say something, then closed it again. Emily froze for a second, her hands tight around her notepad. She wanted to defend herself, but she knew any reply might only make Vanessa louder. Instead, she took a deep breath, nodded politely and said, "I'm sorry you feel that way, ma'am. I'll be nearby if you need anything else." Her calmness only seemed to irritate Vanessa further. "Of course you'll be nearby," she said with a smirk. "That's all you people do. Standing around, waiting for others to tell you what to do." Emily walked away, her steps steady though her heart was pounding. She went behind the counter and gripped the edge of it, taking another deep breath. Inside, she was hurting, but she reminded herself that her worth was not defined by Vanessa's cruel words. She was more than a uniform, more than a waitress, but no one else in the restaurant knew the truth of who she really was. Around the room, whispers began to spread. Customers shook their heads, murmuring about Vanessa's arrogance. Some eyes turned toward Emily with sympathy, others with quiet admiration for how she kept her composure despite the public humiliation. At the table, Daniel finally leaned forward, speaking in a low voice that Emily couldn't hear. But Vanessa just laughed again, tossing her hair over her shoulder. She was enjoying the attention, even if it was negative. To her, humiliating someone was a form of entertainment. Emily continued working, moving from table to table, but the sting of those words followed her. Still, she refused to let her emotions show. She carried herself with grace, even as she felt the weight of the humiliation pressing down on her shoulders. She did not know it yet, but her silence, her patience, and her quiet strength were leaving an impression on everyone in that room. What began as public humiliation was slowly turning into something else, a silent story that every diner was watching unfold. A story that would soon take a turn Vanessa never expected. The night dragged on, and the restaurant only grew busier. Waiters hurried from one table to another, balancing trays of steaming dishes and glasses filled to the rim. The clinking of cutlery and the hum of conversation filled the air, but one table in the center seemed to hold everyone's attention. It was Daniel and Vanessa's table, the place where humiliation had already begun. Emily moved between tables with the same grace she always carried, but inside she was tired. Vanessa's insults still echoed in her mind. Every time she passed by their table, she could feel Vanessa's eyes on her, sharp and mocking, like a knife that wanted to cut deeper. Emily had promised herself she would not break, no matter how cruel Vanessa became. But tonight, her patience was being pushed to its very limit. When Emily returned to check on their meals, Daniel gave her a small, polite nod. "The food is excellent, thank you," he said softly. His voice carried a hint of guilt, as though he knew he should have defended her earlier but lacked the courage. Emily gave him a kind smile, appreciating his words even if they were small. But Vanessa could not let the moment pass without turning it into another insult. She tapped her fork against the plate and said loudly, "Well, of course the food is good. We're paying enough for it. The least they can do is get something right." Emily's smile remained, though her heart clenched. She wanted to walk away quickly, but Vanessa wasn't finished. "Tell me, waitress," Vanessa said, leaning back in her chair with a smirk. "Don't you ever get tired of pretending? Smiling at people who clearly don't care about you? Serving them as if you're invisible?" Her voice was loud, meant for everyone around to hear. Emily replied softly, "I don't pretend, ma'am. I truly enjoy making people's evenings pleasant." Vanessa laughed, the sound sharp and cruel. "Oh, come on. Nobody enjoys being a servant. You say that only because you have no choice. If you had any talent, you'd be doing something better with your life." This time, Emily felt something stir inside her. The words pierced deeper than before. She had always been able to ignore insults, but Vanessa's voice carried so much poison that even other diners looked uncomfortable. A man at a nearby table shifted in his seat, shaking his head, while his wife gave Emily a sympathetic smile. Emily wanted to defend herself, but before she could speak, Vanessa leaned forward again. "Honestly, it's pathetic. You're young. Yet here you are wasting your life serving people who are actually important." Daniel shifted in his seat, his jaw tight. He finally muttered, "Vanessa, that's enough." But Vanessa ignored him, waving her hand dismissively. "No, I'm serious. Look at her. She probably dreams of being like us but can never reach that level. This is all she'll ever be, a waitress in a cheap uniform." The words hung in the air like a cruel shadow. Emily felt her chest tighten, but she refused to let tears form in her eyes. She straightened her shoulders and looked Vanessa directly in the eye, though her voice stayed calm. "Ma'am, every job has value. I'm proud of what I do." For the first time, Vanessa seemed caught off guard by the firmness in Emily's tone. But instead of backing down, she laughed again, louder than before. "Proud? Of this? That's the funniest thing I've heard all night." Her laughter rang across the restaurant, and silence spread as more diners turned to watch. Emily could feel the weight of all those eyes. Some were filled with pity, others with admiration. No one dared to speak, but the room itself seemed to be holding its breath. Emily's hands trembled slightly as she held her notepad. She wanted to scream, to shout out the truth of who she really was. She wanted to tell Vanessa that she was not just a waitress, that she was the daughter of the man who owned this entire restaurant chain, that she had more power and wealth in her family name than Vanessa could imagine. But Emily swallowed those words, forcing them back down. She would not reveal her identity out of anger. Still, her heart ached. She had endured humiliation before, but this, being mocked loudly in front of everyone, felt unbearable. This was the breaking point. She could feel her patience thinning like glass about to shatter. Behind her, a few whispers rose. "Poor girl," one diner muttered softly. Another said, "She's handling this better than anyone else could." Their words gave Emily a small strength, a reminder that people could see the truth without her having to say anything. Daniel finally leaned forward, his voice firm this time. "Vanessa, enough. You're embarrassing yourself." His tone was low, but it carried weight. He looked at Emily briefly, as though apologizing without words. But Vanessa only smirked, tossing her hair over her shoulder. Embarrassing myself? Please, I'm just speaking the truth. She took a sip of her champagne, her eyes never leaving Emily. Emily felt the heat rise in her chest, but she steadied herself one last time. I'll bring your dessert shortly, she said softly and turned to leave. As she walked away, her steps were steady, but inside her heart was racing. She had held herself together, but she knew something had to change. She could not allow this to go on forever. Vanessa had crossed the line from arrogance to cruelty, and Emily knew the time was coming when she would no longer stay silent. This was the moment where patience ended and dignity demanded action. Emily didn't know how or when, but deep inside, she knew the truth could not remain hidden much longer. And when it came out, it would not only silence Vanessa, it would leave the entire restaurant stunned. The night had already been heavy for Emily. She had taken every insult Vanessa threw at her, every mocking laugh, every sharp word meant to make her feel small. The humiliation had been public, loud, and cruel, but Emily held on to her patience like a shield. Still, her heart was pounding faster now, and she could feel that the moment she had tried to avoid all evening was finally approaching. When the meal ended, Emily returned to their table with the bill, holding it neatly on a silver tray. She placed it down with the same calm professionalism she had shown from the start. Daniel gave her a polite nod, reaching for it, but Vanessa snatched it up before he could. "Oh, let me," Vanessa said, her voice sweet but dripping with arrogance. She looked at the total and smirked. "Well, this place is expensive, but I suppose that's what you get when you want quality. Not that you'd know anything about that, would you?" Her eyes darted toward Emily with that same mocking look. Emily stood quietly, her hands folded in front of her. She didn't respond, but Vanessa wasn't finished. She leaned back in her chair and raised her voice slightly so others around could hear. "I wonder how long it would take you to save up just to eat here once. A year? Maybe 2. The restaurant grew quieter again. A few diners exchanged disapproving glances. Some shook their heads, clearly uncomfortable with Vanessa's cruelty. But Vanessa looked proud of herself, enjoying the attention she was creating. Then she gave a sharp laugh and said the words that changed everything. "Honestly, you should be grateful. People like us give you a purpose. Without us, you'd have nothing. Isn't that right, waitress?" Something inside Emily shifted. She had been patient, she had been polite, and she had allowed Vanessa's insults to roll over her like waves crashing against a rock. But now her composure had reached its breaking point. Not with anger, but with truth. She straightened her back, her eyes calm but steady. When she spoke, her voice was clear, not loud, but strong enough for everyone to hear. "Ma'am, I don't think you understand who I am." Vanessa blinked, caught off guard. "What's that supposed to mean?" she asked, laughing nervously. Emily took a slow breath and continued, her words firm yet graceful. "I work here as a waitress because I choose to, but this restaurant does not belong to you, or even to my manager. It belongs to my family. My father is the CEO of this restaurant chain, which makes me—" She paused, her gaze steady on Vanessa. "The daughter of the owner." The words dropped into the air like a stone into still water, and the effect rippled instantly. The restaurant went completely silent. The clinking of cutlery stopped, the whispers faded, and every eye in the room turned to Emily. Vanessa's smirk disappeared. For a moment, her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her eyes widened in disbelief. She looked from Emily's calm face to Daniel, as if expecting him to laugh and say it was a joke. But Daniel didn't. His eyes were locked on Emily, full of shock and something else. Respect. Emily continued, her voice unwavering. "I never tell anyone who I am because I believe respect should be earned, not demanded. Every person who works here deserves the same dignity as any customer who walks through those doors. No job is small, and no one deserves to be humiliated for doing honest work." The diners broke into quiet murmurs. Some nodded, some whispered, and some even clapped softly, unable to hold back their admiration. Vanessa's face turned pale. Her confidence, her arrogance, her mocking laughter, all of it vanished in an instant. She fumbled with the bill in her hand, her perfectly manicured fingers trembling. You're lying," she stammered, though her voice lacked its earlier sharpness. But Daniel finally spoke, his tone firm and certain. "She's not lying. I've read about the CEO of this chain. His daughter is named Emily. I didn't expect it to be you." He looked at Emily with a mixture of awe and regret. The truth was undeniable now. Vanessa sat frozen, her cheeks burning red. The people around her were no longer admiring her dress or her jewelry. They were watching her crumble under the weight of her own arrogance. Emily didn't raise her chin in pride, nor did she gloat. Her expression remained calm, her voice soft but steady. "Ma'am, I don't reveal my identity to embarrass you. I reveal it to remind you, and everyone, that respect should never depend on someone's job or appearance. A waitress, a businessman, a customer, we are all human. And humanity deserves dignity." The silence in the room was heavy, but it was not empty. It was full of realization, of shame for some, and admiration for others. A few diners clapped again, louder this time, and soon the sound of applause spread across the restaurant. Vanessa lowered her eyes, unable to meet Emily's gaze. She shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her earlier confidence gone. Daniel looked at Emily again, his eyes full of something like apology, as though he wished he had spoken up sooner. Emily gave a small bow of her head to the diners who had shown their support, then turned back to the table. "Your dessert will be out shortly," she said simply, before walking away with the same grace she had carried all night. But the truth hung in the air like fire. Everyone knew that nothing about this evening was ordinary anymore. A waitress had revealed herself as the owner's daughter, and in doing so, she had turned the tables completely. Vanessa, once so loud and proud, was left speechless, her cruelty exposed for all to see. And though Emily never intended it as revenge, the revelation had delivered justice in the most powerful way possible. The moment Emily revealed the truth about her identity, the whole restaurant seemed to freeze. For a few seconds, nobody moved, nobody spoke. Even the clinking of glasses and the soft music playing in the background felt like they had stopped. It was as if time itself held its breath, waiting for what would happen next. Emily stood tall and calm, her hands folded neatly in front of her, her face composed. She didn't need to raise her voice or look angry. The truth alone was enough to shake the room. People who had witnessed Vanessa's cruel words and mocking laughter earlier now stared at Emily with wide eyes. The silence was not just the absence of sound. It was heavy, full of judgment and realization. Everyone in the room seemed to be processing the same thought. The woman who had been insulted, belittled, and humiliated was not just a waitress. She was the daughter of the CEO, the very person who held the power and prestige Vanessa pretended to admire. At Vanessa's table, the silence was louder than anywhere else. Vanessa sat frozen, her fingers still holding the bill she had been mocking only moments before. Her lips trembled, but no words came out. The color had drained from her face, leaving her pale. The arrogant sparkle in her eyes was gone, replaced by panic and shame. She shifted in her seat, pulling at her dress nervously, as if trying to hide from the dozens of eyes now staring at her. Daniel leaned back in his chair, his expression tense. For the first time that evening, he seemed uncomfortable with Vanessa. He avoided looking at her and kept his gaze fixed on Emily, his eyes filled with something that looked like guilt. He knew he should have spoken up earlier when Vanessa had crossed the line. He had chosen silence before, but now he realized Emily's silence was far more powerful than his. Around the restaurant, people whispered softly to one another. The couple who had been sitting nearby exchanged glances, and the man shook his head with quiet disapproval. A woman at another table muttered under her breath, "How shameful," clearly referring to Vanessa. Others simply watched, too stunned to speak, but their eyes all carried the same message. They admired Emily's grace and disapproved of Vanessa's cruelty. The silence seemed to press down on Vanessa like a weight. She tried to laugh, a weak and nervous sound. I didn't know," she stammered, her voice breaking, but even those words were swallowed by the quiet room. No one responded. No one believed that ignorance was an excuse for cruelty. Emily, still calm, gave her a polite smile. "It doesn't matter if you knew or not. Respect should not depend on who someone is. It should come from kindness." Her words, though gentle, carried more power than shouting ever could. They echoed through the silence, settling into the hearts of everyone listening. Some diners nodded slowly, as if agreeing with her. Others lowered their eyes, ashamed at how they had sat quietly while Vanessa humiliated her earlier. Vanessa gripped her glass of water tightly, her hand shaking. She looked around, desperate for someone to support her, but no one did. Even Daniel didn't come to her defense. The silence told her everything. Her arrogance had isolated her, and now she was completely alone. Meanwhile, Emily turned away, moving gracefully across the room to check on another table. Her posture was steady, her smile soft but unshaken. She acted as if nothing had happened, as if the revelation had been just another part of her shift. But everyone's eyes followed her. They admired the way she carried herself, how she chose dignity over revenge. The silence slowly began to shift into something else, a quiet respect. A few diners even clapped softly, not loudly like before, but in a gentle way, as if acknowledging her strength. Others offered her kind smiles when she walked past. The atmosphere of the restaurant had completely changed. Vanessa sat frozen, her earlier confidence shattered. Her cheeks burned red with humiliation. Every second of silence stretched endlessly for her, making her want to disappear. She could no longer laugh or mock. Her words had turned into weapons against herself. Daniel finally broke the silence at their table, his voice low and controlled. "Vanessa, enough," he said firmly. It was the first time he had spoken to her with such finality. He didn't look at her again. His eyes remained on Emily, filled with regret. Vanessa opened her mouth to argue, but the words caught in her throat. She knew anything she said would only make things worse. The silence around her was too powerful. She sank back into her chair, wishing the ground would swallow her whole. The restaurant staff, who had witnessed everything, exchanged glances of pride. They knew Emily not just as their coworker but also as the kind-hearted daughter of the CEO. Still, they admired her even more now for how she handled herself. She hadn't exposed her identity out of anger. She had done it with calm dignity, proving she was a true leader. Minutes passed, but the silence remained heavy around Vanessa. Every now and then, the sound of cutlery or quiet conversation returned, but it never lasted long. The weight of what had just happened lingered in the air. The balance of power in the room had shifted completely. For Vanessa, every second was torture. For Emily, every second was proof that grace and patience were stronger than cruelty. And for the diners, it was a lesson they would not forget, that no matter how rich or powerful someone appears, respect is what truly defines a person. By the time Emily passed their table again, carrying dessert for another group, Vanessa couldn't even raise her eyes to look at her. The silence between them was not just absence of sound, it was punishment. A punishment far greater than Emily could have planned. And in that silence, Emily's true power shone brighter than any title or wealth ever could. She had turned humiliation into strength, cruelty into shame, and silence into the loudest voice in the room. The silence that had fallen over the restaurant slowly began to ease. Conversations returned in soft voices. The clinking of cutlery filled the air again, and the soft music carried on in the background. But something had changed. The mood of the entire room was different. Where there had been tension and discomfort earlier, there was now respect. Respect for the young woman who had faced cruelty with dignity. Emily moved from table to table, checking on customers with her usual warm smile. She didn't act proud, nor did she behave differently after her revelation. She was still the same waitress in a simple uniform, carrying plates and glasses with grace. But now, every person who looked at her saw her differently. She wasn't just serving food. She was teaching them something without even trying. At one table, an elderly couple stopped her as she poured water into their glasses. The man smiled and said softly, "Young lady, you handled yourself with more class than I've seen in a long time. Don't ever let people like her make you feel less than who you are." Emily's smile deepened, genuine and kind. "Thank you, sir. That means a lot." At another table, a young woman looked up at her with admiration. "I wish I had your strength," she said quietly. "The way you spoke, it gave me courage." Emily simply nodded, touched by the words. She hadn't wanted to humiliate Vanessa, nor had she wanted to make herself appear grand. All she had wanted was to remind everyone that respect was a basic right. And now, she saw that her words had reached people's hearts. Meanwhile, Vanessa sat stiffly in her chair, her hands folded tightly on her lap. She hadn't touched her dessert, and her eyes stayed fixed on the tablecloth. The shame of her actions weighed on her, heavier than any eyes staring at her. She had come into the restaurant wanting to shine, to prove she was above others, but now she felt smaller than she ever had before. Daniel broke the silence at their table. He sighed heavily and looked at Vanessa with disappointment. "You embarrassed yourself tonight," he said quietly but firmly. "Not her, you." His voice was calm, but the finality in his words cut deeper than anger could. Vanessa's lips parted as if she wanted to argue, but no words came. For once, she had nothing to say. She knew he was right. Daniel turned his gaze back to Emily, his expression softer now. "I should have said something earlier," he admitted. "You didn't deserve any of that." Emily looked at him calmly, her expression unreadable. "Sometimes silence says as much as words," she replied gently, then moved on to continue her work. Her answer left Daniel quiet, thinking about how true her words were. The rest of the evening carried on, but the atmosphere was no longer the same. Diners continued to glance at Emily, some smiling, some nodding their heads in silent respect. Even the staff looked at her with newfound admiration. She wasn't just their colleague anymore. She had proven herself as a leader who could carry both humility and strength. As the night neared its end, the guests slowly began leaving. Many stopped by Emily on their way out, offering kind words. A man in a suit told her, "You remind me that respect is wealth greater than money." A young couple smiled at her and said, "You made tonight unforgettable," in the best way. Emily thanked them all politely, never letting pride show on her face. She knew respect was not about being praised but about living with integrity. When Daniel and Vanessa finally stood up to leave, the difference between them was clear. Daniel's face carried the weight of guilt but also a glimmer of respect for Emily. Vanessa's face, however, was pale and tight, her arrogance gone, replaced by humiliation. She couldn't meet Emily's eyes as they walked past. Emily gave them a small nod, nothing more. She didn't gloat, didn't smirk, didn't try to rub in her victory. Her silence was enough. It was the final reminder that true strength doesn't need loud words or pride. It speaks for itself. After they left, the restaurant felt calmer. The staff gathered briefly near the counter, whispering about what had happened. One of the waiters shook his head and said, "She could have destroyed that woman with her words, but she chose kindness instead. That's real power." Emily only smiled softly. "Sometimes kindness is the strongest answer," she said. By the time her shift ended, the restaurant was almost empty. Emily stepped outside into the cool night air, breathing deeply. The stars shone above her, quiet and endless. For the first time all evening, she let herself relax fully. She had faced humiliation, she had endured cruelty, and she had revealed the truth when it was most needed. But what mattered to her was not the fact that people now knew she was the CEO's daughter. What mattered was that they understood her message. Respect should never depend on wealth, power, or appearances. That night, the story of what happened inside the restaurant began to spread. Diners told their families, their friends, and their co-workers about the waitress who turned out to be the daughter of the owner, about how she faced humiliation with patience and dignity, and about how she left an entire room in silence with her truth. And as the story spread, so did the lesson. People remembered Emily not as a rich man's daughter, but as a young woman who showed that true respect comes from character, not from titles or money. Emily walked home with her head held high, not out of pride, but out of peace. She had restored her dignity, not just for herself but for every person who had ever been looked down on for their work. She had reminded everyone that respect is not given because of status, it is given because of humanity. In the end, the humiliation Vanessa tried to create had only revealed Emily's strength. And the respect Emily earned that night was worth more than any wealth, any title or any applause. It was the kind of respect that lasts forever.